what makes a really awesome console?
The two parts of any gaming platform are great games and great hardware. If you agree that video games are really a unique form of art, then the hardware is like the painter's canvas, or a sculptor's block of stone, and the games are the actual paintings, or the massive sculptures. You need to have great hardware in order to produce masterpiece games, and this is what really makes up a great gaming platform. So while I hope to cover the hardware announcements from Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony, as well as mobile and computer platforms, keep in mind that it's all really about the games, and it will be a while before we see what game developers are able to create with the tools and supplies that hardware companies give them. Like a painter's canvas or a sculptor's block of stone, the hardware determines how far gaming developers can innovate on design, graphics, and game mechanics. So as we all find out together what kind of hardware is available on competing gaming platforms, we can get a feel for how awesome or mediocre future games might be. As some of you subscribers know, we live in an age of awesome hardware innovation, but home console platforms have always been unique. They offer game developers a mass market of standardized hardware controllers and consoles that ensure the gaming experience will be identical in millions of homes. So I wanted to make a video that goes over my thoughts on gaming platform innovations over the last 30 years. But I'd really like to hear what you guys think in the comments below, so that we can all wrap our heads around these innovations together. So let's get started. First, I think it's important to understand what's in the DNA of current console companies. Nintendo has always focused on family-friendly games, Sony is heavily invested in entertainment, and Microsoft's main focus has always been software computing platforms.
Are we going to see the first major console market slowdown since the collapse of the Atari platform in '83?
Since 1977, a new generation of gaming consoles has hit the market every 5.5 years. But it's been almost 8 years since the Xbox 360 came out.
What's going on?
Let's dig into the history of the current console survivors. Nintendo dominated the third generation of consoles with the largest monopoly of the gaming market ever.
Remind me, how'd they do that?
Two big reasons: great games and the first modern controller. First, Nintendo had great games. They disrupted existing game mechanics under the leadership of superstar video game designer Shigeru Miyamoto. Mr. Miyamoto's first innovations came from the arcade hit Donkey Kong, where he was the first person ever to focus on telling a simple story through video game characters before a single line of code was ever typed. Then, side-scrolling platform games started getting popular with this early game. Mr. Miyamoto, inspired by Pac-Man's success, introduced Super Mario Bros. Along with the Nintendo Entertainment System, and together with other big Nintendo franchises, it represented a break with the stale game design of the Atari age. Also, Nintendo controlled the kinds of games developers sold on the NES platform. It required third-party developers to meet strict content requirements that resulted in a gaming platform that appealed to the whole family. On the hardware side, a special chip in the NES ensured that only games made by Nintendo itself would run on the console. But this was really tough for smaller, independent game developers. These small developers had to place minimum game production orders and pay Nintendo in full before a single game could ever be made.
Dang, that sounds tough.
It was. Basically, third-party developers assumed all the financial risk. If the game didn't sell well, Nintendo already made its money, while the publisher could potentially go out of business. To make matters worse, Nintendo required developers to make games exclusively for the NES and no other console, while limiting them to a max of 5 games per year. These harsh rules kept third-party developers from growing too big and powerful. So not only did Nintendo control the hardware, but these rules made sure that it would remain the biggest game publisher on the software side as well. The second thing that made the NES a game-changing platform was the revolutionary NES controller. Previous consoles relied on a joystick with 4-way directional control, up, down, left, and right, but the D-pad on the NES controller could be more easily and precisely manipulated with a single thumb. This design was so disruptive that every major gaming system created since the NES includes a D-pad on its primary controller. So besides these two big factors, let's also not forget how messed up the US gaming industry was at the time. The video game crash of '83 practically begged for the tight vertical integration of a closed Nintendo gaming platform, where a single company controlled the software, hardware, and marketing. In the end, the NES single-handedly rebuilt the US gaming industry. In the fourth generation gaming wars, Nintendo continued its successful strategy, but now with the growing gaming industry, its tight control over third-party developers became a liability. While the gaming market was expanding, Nintendo still focused on games that appealed to young kids. In the meantime, gaming culture was maturing, and core gamers wanted to see the explicit arcade experience in their home consoles. So in order to differentiate the new Genesis gaming platform, Sega invited developers to make games for this growing market. But behind the scenes, This increased the leverage and power of third-party game developers who now had more choices. They could now choose to create new games on either platform, and this helped break Nintendo's former monopoly. In the 5th generation gaming wars, electronics companies saw the potential gold rush and jumped into the battle with their own independent gaming platforms. While they all fought for the attention of third-party game developers, this created a confusing environment of competing platforms. This was ultimately bad for innovation because if you're a small game developer, the problem is you need to prioritize your resources. So you'll naturally prefer to make games for the dominant platform, because there could only be one ring to rule them all.
Sure, as long as it's not the Red Ring of Death.
We'll get to that, hang in there. First, let's get some background into Sony, the next big player. While Sony has always been in the consumer electronics industry, it became a huge entertainment company when it acquired Columbia Pictures back in '89. Today, it's the 3rd largest movie studio and the 2nd largest recorded music company in the world. So for a long time, Sony has been pursuing convergence, the linking of film, music, and digital electronics. So it was natural for Sony to lead the charge towards making consoles more than just gaming devices. The original PlayStation could also play music CDs. But that just wasn't enough. Sony had to figure out a way to differentiate its hardware from the other competing vendors. They did this by taking a huge financial risk. Sony sold the PlayStation at a loss-leading price, but the reward was a decade of console domination. This helped put the console into millions of homes, and developers took notice. The true competitive advantage that separated the PS1 and PS2 was great new games. The PlayStation platform was built on cheaper and larger capacity optical discs. This made the Sony platform more attractive to innovative third-party game developers who preferred the cheaper manufacturing costs and higher storage capacities of optical discs over the more expensive and smaller capacity of cartridge-based platforms. And it sure didn't help that the competing N64's limited memory was more difficult for game developers to program on. So the great games migrated over to the PlayStation platform. Also, Sony copied Sega's strategy of catering to a segment of the market that Nintendo was ignoring. And even though some gaming platforms were actually really innovative and exciting, it was too little too late. The ultimate manifestation of Sony's convergence of film, music, and digital electronics came in the form of the PlayStation 2. Sony upgraded the hardware to a higher capacity DVD optical disc drive that could also play DVD movies. It continued its loss-leading price strategy, making it comparable to existing DVD players at the time. So in the end, the PS2 controlled almost 75% of the market, becoming the de facto media center for many homes during this time. As a matter of fact, Sony just discontinued making the PS2 just a month ago.
What happened to Nintendo during all this?
Even though the N64 and GameCube didn't have a monopoly on the console market like its predecessors, Nintendo survived because of its own epic franchises. These will always be seared into the minds and muscle memory of a generation of gamers. If you ever want to play Mario, Zelda, or Metroid, you have no other legal choice. You have to buy Nintendo hardware.
And what's up with Microsoft's Xbox?
Microsoft got pulled into gaming from its software expertise. During the Windows 95 launch, Microsoft was trying to move computer gaming from MS-DOS to Windows through its DirectX platform. So during the 6th generation of gaming wars, Microsoft lended Sega a hand by developing software for the Dreamcast, but that didn't work out too well. So Microsoft needed to get into the hardware business if it seriously wanted to fight in the gaming wars. NVIDIA and Microsoft eventually teamed up to develop DirectX APIs for a console codenamed DirectX Box. But hardware design was always a weak point in the evolution of the Xbox. The original console was bulky and noisy, and the Xbox 360's early releases suffered from heating issues.
The Red Ring of Death.
Still, the software and server innovations outweighed many of these drawbacks. Today, Xbox Live is a thriving gaming and media network that now includes Windows computers, and it will eventually extend into mobile devices through Windows Phone and Windows 8 software. But both Sony and Microsoft made a big strategic mistake during the 7th generation console wars. While they both focused on bringing their console platforms into the age of high definition through advanced computing hardware, one platform was rushed out too soon with hardware that overheated, and the other platform was too expensive for many gamers. They were fighting the wrong fight. They neglected the latent demand for family-friendly games, Nintendo's specialty from day one. So the Wii revolutionized game mechanics through the Wiimote. This opened up gaming to more than just core gamers, so that almost anybody could pick up a controller and start playing right away. And while it's true that many core gamers can't imagine life without the Xbox Live or the PlayStation's diverse gaming library, Nintendo found a way to succeed as a successful family-friendly gaming platform.
Okay, but what's going to be the best console this year? I don't want to buy a console that that has weak games?
Well, let's start with something that we know console companies can control: first-party games. If you can't imagine life without playing the sequel of any of these first-party titles, then you probably already know which console is best for you. For the rest of us, the second thing to think about is what are the motivations of the companies controlling the platforms. Nintendo is focused on maintaining a family-friendly platform, and its strength has always been its own first-party titles. But it seems that Nintendo is still focused on a closed and tightly controlled platform, but I'll save my thoughts for another video. Sony's early dominance came from its appeal to third-party developers, and its multi-purpose functions as a gaming console and optical media device. And I personally think it's strategically important for Sony to focus on regaining its position as the primary media device in the living room. So I hope to devote a whole episode to how the next PlayStation does this in the TV Wars series. Microsoft's strength is in software and server-side online reliability. Again, I personally think Microsoft needs to build on the healthy PC gaming platform and use the next Xbox to unify Windows 8, Windows Phone, and Windows RT gaming experiences. It looks like both Sony and Microsoft have given up on the expensive cell processor architecture from the 7th generation era. This will make life a lot easier for future game development by building the next platform on the standard PC x86 architecture. But on the downside, this will make backwards compatibility an expensive feature. To make it work, both Sony and Microsoft would have to include both cell and x86 hardware architectures in their next consoles. My guess is that to survive, they both need to keep costs as low as possible, so they may end up leaving out backwards compatibility with physical discs, while possibly promoting access to compatible older games through digital distribution, but that's just my guess. One thing for sure is that digital distribution is the future. This may be the end of the retail gaming industry as we know it today. My hope is that gaming publishers pass these savings on to consumers in the form of lower gaming prices. But I think the figurative big elephants in the living room are mobile devices like tablets and smartphones. I want to see how the upcoming gaming platforms plan to integrate mobile apps and media. I'd like to see how Sony and Microsoft integrate mobile devices into the gaming experience in some way. And finally, controllers need an update. The goal should be to make the controllers smarter. I'd like to see many of the advances in mobile technology integrated into them. Nintendo chose to mimic tablets with their Wii U controller. Sony and Microsoft should include hardware in controllers that could be used to personally identify a gamer, so that instead of bringing a disc over to a friend's house to play a game, I'd like to be able to bring just my controller, have my own game downloaded to a friend's console from the network, and allow us to play the game together. But these are just my thoughts. We will all see what Sony brings to the table next week, and one thing's for sure: if the console kings mess this up, there are a lot of younger, stronger, and more ambitious hardware companies waiting to pounce on the right opportunity. And a ton of game developers have been brushing up their skills in the mobile device platforms. But I'd really like to know what you guys think. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Of course, we'll continue to go deep into the fray of the upcoming 8th generation gaming wars. So if you like any of these types of videos, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Better yet, if you're ready to take the plunge, you can support this channel by clicking the Amazon links below and saving any good video game deals to your cart.
Ooh, this is exciting.